Another gorgeous loading screen, but today we are back taking a look at the Dragonflight Alpha newest dungeon called Ruby Life Pools. The goal of these videos are to get you guys some preliminary info that I believe will be important for your understanding of them in Mythic Plus. So let's get right into it. I've done this dungeon quite a few times now in the alpha, and the thing that's most remarkable about it is how short it is. A lot of people are talking about Mauve Souls in relationship to it. There's been 3 boss dungeons before, but this one is definitely the shortest Mythic Plus we've ever seen. A lot of people are usually excited about short dungeons, but for me, typically, I would not be. That's because when you're pugging, usually the best way to overcome the difficulty of that is by just kind of having a stacked DPS core or an overall overpowered group compared to what the Blizzard set requirements might be. And just say you do like 5% more damage than Blizzard expects you to for each split, meaning you move slightly faster through each pack. Well, over a 40-minute dungeon, that's going to add up to be multiple minutes off the timer, whereas over a 20-minute dungeon, yeah, you're going to have a lot less wiggle room. Let's take a look at the actual dungeon because there is still a lot of complexity and things that you need to be aware of in it, even though it is so short. Short dungeons are also famous for having just way less mob types that you have to learn, so this could be a good thing for the learning process. This guy, again, we're leading off a dungeon with a very unique and difficult mob type. He's basically just going to do this excavating blast, which is a big circle on the ground. You see it hits that dragonkin over there, and it's going to knock him all the way into the air, which obviously is not ideal. Also seems to have taken a good amount of damage from that. Now that pull is definitely something you probably want to combine with these 2 mobs here. I've done this dungeon a bunch now, and it seems like it's really easy to combine a lot of the trash. We end up doing it in this order instead, and this is going to work out too, but you really got to start thinking about how you're going to combine a lot of this trash. These packs seem to just do this spammable Ice Bolt, but they also have this ability called Ice Bulwark, which from what I can tell just puts a massive shield on the target, and you just need to interrupt that or stun it or something like that to stop it. It does look like there's some stone missiles getting thrown around on the ground, so you probably need to dodge that. And yet again, another dungeon with seemingly a ton of magic damage, pretty much the whole way through as well. Like every boss, every trash pack, it's all going to have a ton of magic damage. But you'll see here, we're now in this hallway with a ton of different mobs. Potentially aggroing this entire hallway, I think, is not out of the realm of possibility. The big problem is this big guy, though. Typically, you see I pull him in, we also get yet another one of these mobs that are kind of just standing there. The problem with those mobs is if you do it on a non-blood DK, you're going to have some trouble aggroing them because they all seem to want to cast a lot of spells. So you're going to need some dedicated interrupting. And even if you don't have it, sometimes it can just be overwhelming. We end up dying here. You see the Ice Bulwark going off as well. But gathering these packs is definitely going to be one of the true challenges because, like I said, there's not a lot of ways you could make up time in a dungeon like this. The big question mark will be, what does count look like in a dungeon this short? And you're probably not necessarily going to love to hear that there is actually no trash at all between the second and third boss, and all of the trash between the first and the third boss is not optional. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get up there, but you'll see this is another great opportunity. We interrupt the one on the left, grip the other one in, and we're good to go. Seeing the relatively continual problems with threat here for Blood DK, but other than that, I'm feeling really powerful in these dungeons because of how much magic damage they're doing. We tested them a lot on Prop Pally, and I would definitely say that Blood DK is in a really good place in terms of both overall damage and also just kind of raw sturdiness. So this guy is a mini boss. He doesn't really have a lot of mechanics, but he does this flurry where he just does a ton of damage to whoever his aggro target is, and he also does this blazing rush where he's going to target a player and knock everyone else around him back. So let's have another look at what happened there, because this is probably going to be the most important part of this dungeon that you really need to make sure it doesn't wipe you. So we have this guy standing by these kind of like pools over here, but this is a pretty significant mistake we're making because those pools have dragon eggs in it. Now, if you ever played World of Warcraft, the video game, you're going to know that dragon eggs usually are not a good thing in this game. You're going to see he's going to choose Blazing Rush target, the Warlock here, and he's going to charge right through this player, but because I am in the hitbox, I am also going to get knocked back as well. Warlock and I, pretty much the whole team gets knocked back. I get knocked back into more ads and whelps over there as well. You know, there's 3 packs surrounding this guy that should not need to be pulled, but because we get knocked back into them, now we're pulling them. And I could imagine, you know, Blizzard is obviously not very consistent on some of this stuff, but for me, I would expect that those packs are not needed for count, but maybe they'll just be like 100% of the dungeon needed. You never know how they're going to handle it. If they do, we can just pull them the same way, maybe even with the mini boss. But as you see, when you touch the eggs, we spawn the whelps, and then somebody knocks the mobs back. So now not only do we have the whelps, but we have a 3rd pack pulled as well. And in general, a lot of that stuff can get aggroed pretty easily, and just try to avoid avoid hitting these eggs with the whelps. They're going to just spawn a bunch of them. And that's going to be a recurring theme in this part of the dungeon. Some people have suggested that maybe if you run him into the wall, there's a benefit there. So I actually kind of agree with that mentality. I don't think an actual tangible benefit occurs, like he doesn't take damage or anything. But I think what you want to do here is actually just pull him into this corridor right here. Kind of tank him in here and then make it so he just doesn't move, right? Because you could have him charge into these little ornamental decorative parts of the walls here, or even side to side, or maybe even into this room instead. And then that's going to solve a lot of problems, because in here we actually have RP that is required to start the boss. Now, I'm not actually sure if this mini boss needs to be dead to fight this boss either. Maybe this is a skippable mob. A lot of this discussion is going to depend on count, because again, when you have such a short and linear dungeon, you really need to have the route optimized. This is why Grimrail Depot, things like King's Rest, these dungeons have been notoriously difficult to upgrade in pugs, because they usually require one incredibly crucial skip, and it's usually something that has to be very creative, because the dungeon itself doesn't afford you the ability to be creative. But that's it. We're 3 minutes in and we're at the first boss. So we have Meladrusa Chillworn. What a great name. The boss is going to assault players with powerful frost attacks that focus on area denial. She uses her abilities in an attempt to make players frozen solid by applying Primal Chill. Primal Chill reduces the player's movement speed by 3% per stack. At 10 stacks, the bodies become overloaded with primal frost energy and they are frozen solid. Frozen solid means the character is rendered unable to move or attack for 3 seconds. We also have this Chill Storm ability that's going to go on what looks to be a random player in the group. Chill Storm is described as the boss summons a growing storm of frost at a player's location that pulls players towards the center. The storm inflicts a bunch of frost damage and applies primal chill every 1 second to players standing within it. After 8 seconds, the storm explodes into hail bombs and inflicts 3,000 frost damage to all players. You see this giant, what almost looks like a water thing, pulling us in, and we need to get out of it. So you see I actually dip into it by accident, get the stack. After that, I move out of it. The whole time is trying to pull you into it, so as long as you're not in the dead circle, you won't be getting these stacks. And then the small swirls come, and I accidentally walk into some of them, so I get 2 stacks from that. Now, I actually did that really wrong on one of the runs, and I got stunned entirely, but Icebound can get you out of it. Things like Bubble on Paladin will be able to break you out of that no matter what. Next up, we have a very interesting mechanic called Awaken Whelps. It's just going to summon a ton of little ads here, and these ads are going to spread all out because your damage dealers are clueless, and this is going to be a huge pain. But there's been a lot of mechanics like this in the many years of World of Warcraft where a ton of ads spawn at any given time. Obviously, if they're next to the boss, they're going to get cleaved down, and there's not going to be any issues with them whatsoever. But the problem is going to arise when you have healers or even ranged DPS that are generating passive threat kind of scattered all over the room. So this will be their responsibility to make sure that they're funneling them into you. But obviously in this case, you know, we can grip a single one or ton a single one off a player. So if we're playing Blood DK, a really good opportunity for Gore Fiends, throwing a D&D down, hitting with Blood Boil, or of course now using the famous Slappy Hands ability that's returning for Dragonflight Talons. Now in this footage, that is actually the entire fight. When we summon a second set of ads, this happens a lot, by the way. Like, this is going to continue to happen. You see these ads go all over the place, but the boss is just dead at this point, so it doesn't matter. They're going to despawn, and that is the end of the encounter. But I think this fight is actually going to be very difficult. Typically, when you have a small 3-boss 5-man, you usually expect the tyrannical version of this dungeon to be very unfair. Like we saw this with Mists, right? It's got bosses that are just really complicated. So I'm trying to think of ways that this fight can get really complicated. And one of the interesting things that we see here is actually a mechanic that just doesn't ever appear in this version of the encounter. The boss overloads with primal frost energy for 8 seconds. While channeling, she inflicts a bunch of frost damage and applies primal chill every 2 seconds to all players. And it says here it can become deadly quickly unless it is interrupted. But what I imagine is probably going to happen here is there's probably going to be so many ads that you're going to be focused on dealing with them, and they're going to be splitting your attention from other stuff that's going on in the fight. I'm not exactly sure how it would play out, but I would not be surprised at all if eventually she channels all of these whelps kind of back to back to back, and you have to quickly deal with them, and then she starts going into more dangerous mechanics. Whether or not the whelps like respawn or something like that, you know, I don't know what like the 5-minute version of this fight might look like. And I think, you know, it's a fight that we really haven't seen anything similar to in the past. You know, spawning all of these ads is like a cool little novelty, but it's a really big waste of DPS. Like, people are inevitably going to kind of waste their time killing them, right? Like, you want to cleave them down, obviously, but you really don't want to sacrifice much damage on the boss, because as you see, the boss is just going to keep on doing it here. So yeah, I'm not really sure what this fight will look like at Mythic Plus, but I'm always very weary of fights in these 3 boss dungeons. They've always been historically very complicated. Next up, we're going to take one of these drakes up. We can take any of them, and we just go way upstairs, which just looks absolutely gorgeous. This is actually a location in the zone that we were able to test this week, and I have to say, it's just cream of the crop, man. It's so good looking, and the skybox actually matches the time of day. So if you watch me do these dungeons during the afternoon, it's really nice as well. well, but this is like the night skybox, and my god does it look good. So at this point we have the boss right in front of us, but we cannot attack her until we've killed all the fire elementals around the area. So we have to go to each one, and now things are getting a little weird. We're now in a position where we have to clear out this entire ring, and this is where the question starts to really rise. What is count going to look like in this dungeon? One thing that you might not notice immediately is there's actually all these little scorchlings around. They have very little health, but there is a lot of them around this area, and there's even going to be some more with the main pack, but they kind of get killed by the mobs here. My thought is that these are going to give 0 count. I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised if that was the case, and if so, you're really going to have to try to make sure you're skipping these things. There's some just simple walking you can do that. At worst, you can just quickly gather them all and then take them there. They are applying a debuff that I'm not entirely sure what it does, but I'm assuming it's going to make us take like more fire damage or something like that, so we AMS that. On top of that, we have the 2 Cinder Weavers. The main one here is going to be this Blaze-Bound Destroyer. Now, when this guy dies, he's going to do this burnout mechanic. You need to get away from this, otherwise, as you see, it's going to do a good chunk of fire damage. Obviously, as a tank, it's not that big of a deal, but this is going to be part of the actual encounter too. So on the way, again, we have more actual trash packs, and you're going to see the same thing here. Cinder Weaver, and we also have Flame Dancer. We're going to see that for the first time. The Cinder Weaver, we can just interrupt the cast doing that Cinder Bolt, nothing special. But the Flame Dancer is going to do another similar mechanic to what we just saw. When it dies, it basically refuses to die and just starts spamming out fireballs everywhere. But otherwise, that mob is basically dead, and we just have to wait for it. Now here you'll actually see a cool old blast from the past mechanic here. You see the Blaze-Bound Destroyer, that is the mini boss that we have to kill multiple of to advance to the next encounter, is going to cast Living Bomb. Just like that Baron Geddon guy. He's going to put it on one of these dragon guys in our 5-man, and that guy's going to take damage, and then he's eventually going to explode, and he's going to go pop up into the air. It's also going to do this Inferno ability, which seems to put some kind of dot on us. Yep, it's just a dot that lasts for a while, does some fire damage. So potentially dangerous on, fortified keys, but tossing down that AMZ, and we're all set. And again, both of these guys, Flame Dancer and the Fire Elemental, they are going to refuse to die, so you just kill them, get them to 0, and then probably just run away. Again, you're going to see these Scorchlings kind of in our way here. We really can avoid them by just hugging the right here, and it's pretty crucial because now this area, there's actually no trash in. There's like a little kind of bulwark where the mobs are here. So what we can do at this point, we can just mount up and kind of ride around the back right side. I don't really know what this guy's here for. It doesn't seem like anything, but again, same thing. Now instead of the back right side, we hug the back left side. The left side there is wide open. We don't have to pull those, but if they do give count, yeah, maybe there'll be a little bit more to discuss there, but see how they spawn a bunch of them here and then the NPCs just actually end up killing them for you. I'd imagine that usually means that there's actually no value to them. Again, we have Living Bomb. It's just the exact same packs over and over again. Just be ready, kill them quickly, and then just get out of there on death mechanics. And again, the Blaze-Bound Destroyer, that mechanic is going to exist on the next boss, so it's important that you learn it here. This one, there's mobs on both sides of the road, so a little bit harder to dodge. I think you can probably go behind that tree as well if you really wanted to. The question is going to be like, which direction do you go from the start though? I'm not really sure if it actually matters. I'm thinking there might actually be a way to like pull one pack on say the right side and then go back around the left side and then avoid one of the packs. Like see how this pack here is actually patrolling, but we have the boss available at this point. Like we've killed all the mini bosses and now we have this patrolling pack here in the middle. So I think, there's probably some conceivable way that we might actually benefit from either trying to skip these or do something fancy here where we just don't ever fight these guys. If they're not needed for count, this is definitely the most concrete way you can skip them. Just kill the guys and then just backtrack, or you can shroud here or Invispot or something like that. Something to keep in mind, but of course we have the Scorchlings on us right now, putting dots and stuff on us. So realistically, in most groups, we're probably just killing these. This is an incredibly simplistic encounter and it makes me think that it's going to be incredibly tuned numerically. Like when you see a boss that really only has 2 mechanics, you start to wonder what the Mythic Plus version is going to be like. But you see when this boss reaches 100 energy, it's going to start Ritual of Blaze Binding, and it is going to summon one of those ads that we just saw on Trash. So Blaze Bound Firestorm, we need to kill it. It is not grippable, it is not stunnable. We need to get over there and kill it. You see it's going to do the same thing that the Trash did. It's going to cast this Inferno ability, just basically going to do a bunch of fire damage to people. It's also going to cast Roaring Blaze. This is just something that needs to be interrupted, and if it's not, it's going to do even more damage to everyone, and that one can be dispelled. But there is one other major mechanic that we need to talk about. Before we do that though, there's also going to be the on death effect from these mobs. So when these mobs die, they're going to still do the burnout. You need to get out of that. And perhaps more interesting is in the dungeon journal, for the first time, we see a mythic only mechanic. It says on mythic difficulty, this ability leaves behind scorched earth, which inflicts a lot of fire damage to players within the flames every 1 second. So I'm not sure if there's any way to actually choose where these mobs spawn, but it does seem like you're going to have very limited area to fight these guys, because it's very possible that the burnout is the entire circle here, and that is the scorched Scorched Earth as well. It's a very big animation, and I think it honestly would make a lot of sense if that's the area denial that they create on this fight, because there is one other mechanic that you should definitely be aware of on this fight. Here it is right there, Molten Boulder. You see, it is going to get targeted at a player, and then it's going to roll at them. It says the boss slams a molten boulder into the ground in front of her, inflicting a lot of fire damage to any player it touches, and also knocking them back and then stunning them. The boulder rolls forward up to 40 yards and then explodes, dealing damage to all players within 12 yards. So you can actually see that there. If anybody is in that radius right there, they're basically going to die. But on top of that, again, it has the modifier for Mythic that it's going to leave Scorched Earth. So this is what I'm thinking about is going to be happening on this fight on Mythic, and this is why I think this is going to be so unique. From what I can tell, I cannot guarantee that this happens because you cannot get people to actually do this on the alpha. But one time it did happen where somebody got picked with the boulder and the boulder ran into the ad. It looked like it hit the ad and dealt damage to the ad as well. And I think this is really crucial to handling both mechanics. Basically, you want to kill this ad as quickly as possible. Everybody hard swaps to it, and then when the boulder comes out, the boulder rolls into it and finishes the ad. And then you leave both Scorched Earth puddles in the same spot. So then you potentially drag the boss away or something. Like, I don't really know how long it's going to take to kill this boss, but presumably you'll have the entire ring to fight the boss. Like, you have all of this area that you just cleared out. Maybe there's some meta strategy there as well, but I do think this is going to be an incredibly difficult fight because, like, when there's only literally 2 mechanics, you know, that kind of scares me, honestly. And then we are literally on to the third boss, which is kind of weird. I don't really like that. They've done that a few times in dungeons where there's actually 0 trash in between 2 bosses. This usually is very hectic for Tyrannical, but as you see, just an absolutely gorgeous dungeon, and I'm telling you, this skybox is beautiful. But this fight is overwhelming to me. Like, I'm not really sure what to say about it. Let's just take a look at the encounter and see what we can learn from it visually, because I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on in this encounter. But you see the dragon just kind of randomly lands and starts doing this giant frontal breath. On top of that, the boss is like causing wind, and it's doing this mechanic called Storm Slam. So out of the gate, we have basically 3 things happening, and then we have a 4th thing started. These little fireballs spawning everywhere. It's very hard to tell, like, if there's any way you're supposed to interact with them, or if they're simply just things that you have to move out of. This is a very common thing in this dungeon, things to move out of, but you see that winds of change starts actually blowing them around. So it has the potential to be interesting, but I'm just not really seeing like the counterplay quite yet. So you see, it looks like he goes up at about like 25%. He's still going to do the mechanics while he's alive up there. It looks like he's still fully attackable, but the boss is going to continue to do all the mechanics that it did on the ground, just with the dragon in tow, and now the dragon's movable. So we have that frontal breath. We have this flame spit mechanic, which is spawning more of these red puddles on the ground that we need to move out of. At this point, I'm thinking, like, can we soak them? What's the goal here? I don't know. It's just like a bunch of area denial. See, it seems like they're going away. Like, look at that. You see these 2 actually go away when I hit them. I run into the one and it goes away, and then I run into the other and it goes away. But I think it could be a coincidence because I tried to do this on other instances of this and it just didn't seem like anything was actually happening. But again, on normal, it's super easy. So let's take another look at that whole boss, because I think this boss is going to be incredibly complicated. So it says here, the boss's dragon boss will fire attack, ignite an inferno in infected players, inflicting 1,500 fire damage every half second for 2 seconds. This effect begins at 2 stacks and increases in duration. Every 1 second, afflicted players explode in flames, inflicting 1,500 damage to other players within 5 yards, leaving a flaming ember behind. This ember explodes moments later, charring the ground for 45 seconds. So you can actually see that on these players here. That's these red rings around these players, because those are the 2 players who have it currently. Oh, actually, I see. It's spawning from them. Very interesting. So these things are on the ground are actually spawning from the players who had that mechanic. So let's watch it again. So you see it's going to go out on these players. They have 5 stacks of it, the warlock and the healer. They're going to just kind of run. They're running out of the other mechanic too, which is pretty unfortunate that they have both things. And they're just going to make this beeline across the room, which is honestly really unfortunate. And it's just going to spawn this all in this cluster. So that makes a lot of sense, actually. Next up, we have Flame Spit. The boss spits a gout of fire, inflicting a lot of damage to targeted players, implying inner inferno to affected players. And then we have the thing that we've seen the most obvious, the Roaring Fire Breath. Ejects flames in a frontal direction, inflicting a lot of fire damage every second and applying inner inferno to the affected players again. Yeah, so we have the flame on the ground. If somebody gets hit by it, they pick up the debuff, then they drop it. Yeah, okay, that seems to be how it works. Looks like it might also spawn a pool on its own. I just don't really know at this point, but it does seem like there's a lot going on in this fight. You know, this fight kind of reminds me of Time Captain Hooktail, right? A fight with there's so much stuff going on it that it's just going to be one of those things like, man, if you do not actually have bloodlust or heroism here, you're in some serious trouble. On top of that, there's a whole other boss worth of mechanics, so let's read these now. Eckhart conjures a localized hurricane, inflicting nature damage for 3 seconds and directionally pushes pushing players and the inner infernos. The Winds of Change are going to potentially pull them together. We also have Storm Slam, which we saw. That card delivers a massive blow to a player, inflicting a bunch of physical damage and a bunch of nature damage, additionally increasing the nature damage taken by 100% for each. Yeah, when we have 3 stacks of this needs to be removed by the healer. And of course, since it's both nature and physical, we've seen a lot of tank mechanics like that. As Death Knight, we're really well equipped to deal with that. Other tanks are probably going to struggle, but it's just going to be crucial that the healer's ahead on the dispels. And presumably we'll be able to probably AMS these stack applications as well. Now on normal, it says Zephyr conjures a massive burst inflicting damage to all players, but the Mythic version says something much different. Interrupting Zephyr. That card conjures a massive burst inflicting damage to all players and interrupting casts for 4 seconds. Yeah, this fight does really remind me a lot of Time Cap and Hooktail, man. This fight is going to be an absolute pain, I think, honestly. On the bright side, that seems like it's everything. How exactly the fire works, I still am not confident in saying, but it looks like it's ultimately just going to be one of those things like don't stand in it, try to take as little damage from it as possible, and just, yeah, basically make sure you have heroism for this boss. We see the Warlock has this mechanic again, and then I'm actually going to get it too, and this part doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. We see the Flame Spit mechanic go off, and then I just immediately have 3 stacks with like a 1-second duration. So I am actually going to drop these stacks here. You see also the Paladin, and we're just going to drop more fire pools here. And then again, at the end here, I actually run over this one, and you're going to see it again here. I run over this one by accident and get the debuff yet again. And then I take it over another one, and that one goes away too. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Let me know what you guys think. If you've seen or learned anything about this. I think this is a very interesting dungeon. Will it be fun for Mythic Plus? You know, a lot of people seem to really like short dungeons. Me, in my historical perspective, usually short dungeons are not the best for Mythic Plus because, like I said, it's kind of hard to overcome the Blizzard set barriers of DPS requirements. But this dungeon just looks so good, man. I don't even really care. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in the next video.